unbelievably excited. Everyone in the back is excited. Everyone watching at home is excited. But most importantly, everyone here is super excited. That's what I like to hear. Because this is the first ever historic Wrestling MediaCon Hall of Fame. And what a bunch of unbelievable inductees we've got this evening.
It's an absolutely illustrious class we have for this Hall of Fame, including the pioneer of podcasts, Colt Cabana, the godfather of wrestling journalism, Dave Meltzer is here as well. It's amazing names.
We've also got the Prince of Power Slam, Finlay Martin, and the Sultan of SummerSlam, Martin Goldsmith.
It's going to be an amazing night. I know we're all excited, so without further ado, let's meet our first Hall of Fame inductee.
In 1992, a writer and wrestling fan from Lancashire called Finlay Martin launched a magazine called Superstars of Wrestling. This would be replaced 2 years later by a brand new title known as Power Slam. With Finlay as its editor, Power Slam would go on to run for 20 years and 237 issues, becoming the highest-selling pro wrestling magazine in Europe. Power Slam went behind the scenes of the pro wrestling world, covering the big stories with hard-hitting and unbiased journalism. In the mid-90s, Power Slam introduced UK fans to a wrestling world outside of the WWF and WCW, with its dynamic reviews of ECW and the Japanese scene. Over the years, its absorbing interviews with major stars never shied away from controversy, due to Finlay's unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth behind wrestling's biggest stories. Finlay's unique opinions and entertaining writing style in Power Slam influenced many of today's British wrestlers, bloggers, podcasters and writers, and he set the standard for exactly how professional wrestling should be chronicled in these modern times. We are delighted to welcome Finlay Martin into the 2018 Wrestling MediaCon Hall of Fame.
Now let's meet the person who is going to induct this very person. He is the brain behind the touring sensation that is Inside the Ropes, Kenny Mcintosh.
The touring sensation. I'm going to use that from now on. How many people in here read Power Slam magazine? I don't want to get too serious here, but I've done so many things. We did a show with Paul Heyman in New Orleans, but getting to induct Finn Martin is like the coolest thing I've ever done, so I'm really happy to be here to do it for him. And tonight, I mean, you know, you get the Olympics every 4 years, the World Cup every 4 years. Tonight you get a rarer thing, a public appearance by Finn Martin. He never does them, ever. So we're going to get that, but I've been podcasting with Finn now for 16 months, and the biggest thing that he does that impresses me is his humility. He doesn't really get how much he shaped wrestling in the UK. You know, Inside the Ropes would never be a thing without him. WrestleTalk would never be a thing without him. This convention would never have happened without him. And I don't think he quite realizes the effect that he has on people. And, you know, in the 90s, we didn't really have the Wrestling Observer. I know Dave Meltzer's going to be here tonight. But if you were in the UK, Power Slam was your Bible. That is what you bought. The last Thursday of every month, you went to R.S. McCall or W.H. Smith or John Menzies, if you're too old, and you bought Power Slam. And he never patronized you. He always educated you. And that's what I love about him. He was the godfather of wrestling journalism here, and he still is. I remember one of the funny things for me was Montreal happened in 1997, and I was like 12 years old, and my mum would never let me stay up and watch the pay-per-views, so I would like watch the main event in the morning just to like see what happened so nobody could spoil it in school. And I'm watching like Shawn Michaels put the sharpshooter on Bret Hart, but he doesn't tap out, and the match is finished. I keep rewinding it, and I can't figure out what's going on. And then I watched Raw on the Friday night after, and they say Bret Hart's left the World Wrestling Federation. I had no idea what was going on. and I raced to RS McCall. I got Power Slam. I saw Bret Hart in the front. I quit. Bret Hart leaves the World Wrestling Federation. And he told us what happened. And he didn't BS us. He didn't patronize us. He told us the facts and what had happened. And without him, I don't think that me and many other wrestling fans would be able to understand wrestling the way that we do today. And one other thing is, Power Slam at the back page had the Power Slam hotline. And I think some of us here maybe called it without our parents' permission. And I remember calling it, and I found out the Big Boss Man was coming back to the WWF in 1998. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So my mum the next month comes, she was like, Kenneth, £23 on this phone bill. I said, Mum, Finn Martin told me the Big Boss Man's back. And she said, I don't care if your granddad came back from the dead, £23 is too much. But for me, in 1996, when I first bought the magazine, I know some people bought it before then, through to 2014, he was our influence. He was what made us love wrestling. We never had to have his opinion, but he formed our opinions and have an intelligent wrestling discussion. So it really is my honor, and I'm so psyched to do this. Ladies and gentlemen, the first inductee into the Wrestling Media Hall of Fame 2018, Mr. Finlay Martin!
Do I need to say anything after that invigorating introduction? I'm not sure if I can even follow that speech, so maybe I should just leave now. What do you think? No? I can't do that. Yeah, as Kenny just said, I used to run Power Slam, edited it and published the magazine from July 94 to July 2014. The magazine had some good years, it had some pretty amazing years, and it also had some bad years and some really bad years. That's partly why it's no longer around, unfortunately. Earlier this week, I was in London, where I met up with two people who had previously worked for Comag, which that was the company that distributed Power Slam in the shops at home and overseas. These two people, the names mean nothing to you. They're called Pete Lewis and Mark Swan. You know, these two guys, even though they mean nothing to you, they meant a lot to the magazine. They were there working in the background, cutting the deals, just trying to increase Power Slam's presence on the shelves and really increase its circulation, and just trying to make it a success. You know, and they weren't interested in wrestling. You know, their eyes like glazed over whenever I would try to talk about it with them. I'm sure you all know people like that. But they knew the business, they knew the magazine business, and their assistance was invaluable. The reason I'm telling this story is to convey that Power Slam was very much a team effort. You know, obviously I'm taking the glory here, but there was a lot of people involved in this process, not just me. You know, the distribution people seem to often have a better handle on how things are going than I did. I mean, when you're in the magazine business, you're on like a constant treadmill, and you're often at the mercy of events and like ebbs and flows of the business. You never really know what's going to happen next. I definitely feel like the magazine benefited from the WWF's comeback in 1997. You know, its year of rebuilding spawned, I think, a new wave of fans in the UK. If you were at One Night Only in September 1997, or were watching it at the time, you should have been able to sense that change was coming. You know, it was, I don't know whether you'd call it a seismic shift, but the business was changing. It really felt like something big was going to happen. I don't think any of us really knew how big it was all going to get. But that to me was a turning point, was One Night Only. And you've got to remember, Steve Austin wasn't even on the card. So Issue 40 of Power Slam, which was published the very next month, October 1997, that was like a watershed for the magazine, and partly due to a news trade promotion that these guys in the magazine business, in the distribution business rather, had urged me to invest in. At that point, it worked, and the magazine was rolling. More than 3 years after its launch, we really were in business. I think 2002 was like Power Slam's really, really good first year as a business. And by then, many of the magazines that had sprung up in order to capitalize on the 1998 to 2001 wrestling boom, they'd closed. But Power Slam, after like 8 years at this point, was established. We had our act together. We had like a really good team of writers, photographers, and we had like the formula, and it was like a kayfabe-free zone as well by that point, which I think was very important. So, I mean, it was doing well. I think 2006 to 2008 were our best years as a magazine. I think everything was really clicking by that point. And we were still doing all right in terms of sales by about 2010. But, sales, they sort of dwindled the next year. And as much as it pained me to admit it, the magazine's downward trend was permanent by the end of 2011. In the meantime, costs rose, and, it was all it just got to the point where I knew it wasn't going to last forever. And running the magazine, because when you're doing something like that, it basically takes over your life. So you're coming up for a huge life change. So I didn't want to let go of that magazine either, but really by 2014, it was inevitable. I could only delay it for so long. July 2014, were any of you, I'm sure some of you were buying the magazine in July 2014? Thank you. Well, at that point, I put it to death, and it was a really sad moment. Any of you who bought the magazine would have read that, the half-page obituary that I wrote in the news section, and I've got to say some tears were shed at that moment. But I knew it was the right thing to do. I didn't want to continue doing the magazine and resent it. I wanted it to go out while it still mattered. And I think, having spoken to quite a few people today, such as your good self over there, sir, and other people over the years, in fact, it wasn't really until I closed the magazine that I realized that it did matter. And I think, in life and certainly in business, if you can do something that matters, then I think you've won. You've done all right. So even though it was a sad day to close it, it was the right decision. Besides, I wanted to do other things. I ended up starting work on my first book, Pro Wrestling Through the Power Slam Years. That was released in September 2015. Thank you. So yeah, it took me, I think in the final issue of Power Slam, I kind of misjudged how long it was going to take to write. I think I said it would be out by like the end of the year. Well, it wasn't. Came out the next year, but if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Yeah? So I was pleased with that. Meanwhile, I started doing podcasts. Sorry about that. Podcasts for WrestleTalk. It seemed to me that there was life after Power Slam. I must confess, I had a bit of a wobble last year. I stopped watching wrestling entirely for about 6 weeks. That was the first time in 6 weeks. Well, I'll tell you what, you stopped watching. It seemed like maybe it was a bit longer than that. But it was the first time I'd stopped watching wrestling in like nearly 30 years. And, it felt strange, as if there was this like enormous void in my life. Now I know how wrestlers feel when they retire, and you understand why they return. During this period, which I would describe as like a period of bewilderment, I even applied for a job, a 9-to-5. Can you imagine that, at a university? I wasn't, well, exactly, I wasn't thinking straight, was I? I'd take a leave of my senses. I mean, I would have been dying inside if I'd found employment with this Institute of Learning and spent my days writing and rewriting its website. To be honest with you, I wasn't offered the job. You know, had I been offered it, hopefully I would have had the good sense not to take it. I'm a great believer in the philosophy that sometimes you have to make a wrong turn to realize you were going in the right direction in the first place. Kenny Mcintosh, my host on the Power Slam podcast, he also made a career change last year, as I'm sure you all know. I got in touch with him. We'd done a couple of podcasts together. He'd very kindly helped me promote books, which was very decent of him. And I got in touch with him, and he said, "Do you want to do something?" And I was like, "Oh, well, you know." And at this point, I was trying to decide whether I was in or out of wrestling. He convinced me that we should do something, and then the Power Slam podcast was born. While attending a Goldberg event in summer 2017, which was produced by Inside the Ropes, I met James Dixon for the first time. I'm sure you all know James Dixon. That led to my involvement a few months later in the brand new WrestleTalk magazine, which I'm sure you've all bought. And if you haven't, you should. As you probably know, issue 6 of the magazine was published 2 weeks ago. So I was back in wrestling, and it was, you know, what was I thinking? Why would I want to leave wrestling? You know, this is, you know, I think it's something I can do all right. I know a little bit about it by this point. Why should I do something else? You know, and it feels great to be back writing about wrestling again. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank Kenny and James really for giving me a reason to come back, and of course Wrestling Media Con for this award, and not forgetting all of you for supporting this event. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up one more time for Finlay Martin. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Our first inductee, Finlay Martin, but there's more to come, Joe Hendry.
Oh, there's so much more to come. Tell us a little about what we got next.
Well, coming up next, we have a man that has all of the important connections, first of all. You know, he was the guy who convinced Vince McMahon to bring the WWE to the UK. He's partly responsible for bringing British wrestling into the mainstream.
I think you might be talking about the individual that was responsible for SummerSlam 1992, perhaps.
That's right. Let's get ready to meet our next inductee.
In 1989, the WWF debuted on Sky TV, and an entire generation was introduced to the larger-than-life world of sports entertainment. Martin Goldsmith, founder and chairman of event merchandising, and his brother, the music promoter Harvey Goldsmith, realised there was a huge market for the WWF to run live events in the United Kingdom. Martin flew to the United States to meet with Vince McMahon and convinced him to hold the first ever WWF UK live event. This meeting was the genesis of the WWF's expansion into the UK and the start of almost 30 years of live World Wrestling Entertainment events. The Goldsmiths went on to promote SummerSlam 1992, which drew more than 80,000 people to Wembley Stadium and is to this day the biggest ever WWE live event held outside North America. Martin is a true pioneer who also worked with Impact Wrestling and is highly respected for igniting a relationship between American wrestling and its British fans, which has endured for almost 3 decades. We are delighted to welcome Martin Goldsmith into the 2018 Wrestling MediaCon Hall of Fame.
Ladies and gentlemen, introducing your next inductor. He is a WWE Hall of Famer, a legend in professional wrestling, Double J, Jeff Jarrett.
right. Good evening, Manchester. All right. Thank y'all for coming out. You know, I love the jacket too. But you know, it really is an incredible honor for me to be standing here tonight. And I could stay up here all night and talk about Martin's list of accomplishments over and over and over and over. There's so many of them. But, you know, I think I'm going to start with his greatest accomplishment. This man has been in the sports business, the entertainment business, the live event business, the merchandise business, and he's been married to one lady for 50 years. That's truly incredible. He's a father of 3 children. He's a grandfather of 15 he's a grandfather to 15 grandchildren. And that in and of itself in our business, the entertainment business, is really something to hang your hat on. But that's his personal life. In his professional life, seriously guys, I literally could stand up here all night and talk about him. He has promoted Live Aid. He's promoted, that's right. He's promoted the Rolling Stones. My personal favorite, he's promoted the Muppets. In 1989, it's already mentioned, he went into Vince McMahon's office. That's a miracle in and of itself. But he convinced Vince to bring at the time, obviously the WWF at the time, bring them over here. Sold out with a couple of adverts in the Sun, sold out in 30 minutes at the London Arena. And then I can truly say that I don't believe, no, I know I would not be standing here, a boy from Tennessee, getting the honor to induct this gentleman into the British Wrestling Hall of Fame. I wouldn't be here if it wouldn't have been for Martin and his team at Event Merch that brought SummerSlam 1992 to London, England. Now, the numbers don't lie, and 92,000 people, that record to this day, some 27 years later, is the second most attended WWE event in history. So folks, you give yourself a round of applause. But Martin didn't stop there, and this is something that, as a fellow promoter and a businessman, is something that to this day blows my mind. SummerSlam 92 did multiples in merchandise than WrestleMania 3 did. That number to this day still stands. An incredible merchandise record, and you Brits definitely emptied your wallets that day, I assure you that. But no, I like I said, I could stay up here all day. He brought the WWF to United Kingdom, and then that relationship rocked and rolled for many years, and then I had a crazy idea and started a little company called NWA TNA, and there you go, the TNA faithful still strong. But I made a call to my old friend Martin, and as they say, the rest is history. That relationship still exists to this day. Martin and his team are a part of the most attended live event in TNA's history, and it's something that I'm very proud of. Again, I could go on and on, but I'll shut up right now. And at this time, it gives me with great honor, great prestige, and I'm very humbled and very grateful after the year I've had being inducted to the WWE Hall of Fame. And here I am, I get to induct the most important man, in my opinion, in British wrestling history, Mr. Martin Goldsmith.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Jeff, because it's all well deserved, every word you have said. Of course, when it comes to a lot of the kudos in the original, going back into the early days, also goes to my brother, who actually was one of the main promoters for very early days for WWF. But I seem to have taken over that mantle ever since. And we, going back to 1993 or 92, I believe, or even earlier than that, Cyndi Lauper was touring the UK, and she said to Harvey, I'd like you to meet this guy called Hulk Hogan, because I think there's a potential that we could do. He's involved with a thing called rock and wrestling. And Cyndi Lauper was, she had a part in the video, and she employed Hulk Hogan and Captain Lou Albano as her kind of, thank you, as her bodyguards. And we met with a Hulkster, and he said, I want you to meet this Vince McMahon. Which we did. We met Vince McMahon, and Vince said, I'm just in the middle of kind of negotiating a deal with Sky TV to bring WWF onto TVO here. And we said, okay, if you do the deal, we're going to tour you. And as time went by, Vince was a bit cynical. He said, well, we're just fairground people. We're not big enough to do touring. So we said, well, okay, fine. Well, we'll take the risk and we'll prove you wrong. So, as Jeff alluded to earlier, one ad in the Sun or one ad in the Mirror, whatever it was, and we sold 10,000 tickets in one day for an arena, the London Arena, which is near Docklands. And from then on, we set up a licensing division, a merchandising division, and from then on, it was history. And history was made. Thank you. We toured the country. We broke into Europe. We then went to India, South Africa, Israel, all to the same acclaim for the great shows that those guys put on. Excuse my voice. So, first of all, I've always had a great time. Any events that we've been involved with the world of wrestling, whether it's been with WWF, TNA, and now currently WOSW, which is going to take the country by storm. It already has done, actually, on TV. We're very pleased that ITV have given us they've given us prime viewing time, so we're on 3 times a week now. But coming here today to see all the enthusiasm that's going on around me gives us tremendous heart with the whole scene. As we all know, the indie scene is booming. And as I sit here and talk to everybody, I realise there's a hell of a lot more in the world than just the UK, and I'm sure that the UK scene will soon burst out worldwide, and I'm proud to be part of it. And also, the idea of coming here today for WrestleCon, all down to Paul Benson, I think it's a great idea, and I can only see it expanding. And I want to thank all you guys here for coming here. I want to thank Jeff. Thank you. I want to thank Jeff for, we go back quite a long way, we've had some good times together, and I want to thank him for his introduction. I also want to thank a guy that probably most of you know, Dean Dionysus, known as the Genesis, for being, oh there he is, for he's been the man who's been pushing me to do this. And I thank everybody for giving me time to talk and to... I could go on for hours. Does anybody want to hear any stories? No, not really. You don't really, do you? Anyway, some of you guys might have read this, but I'll tell you anyway. So there I was in Paris, World Wrestling Federation. We had a show at Bercy, and the next gig after Paris, who's heard this story, by the way? Oh, great, okay. The next story after Paris is that we're going to be in Bournemouth, and the guys have to be downstairs in the hotel lobby at 8:30 to get the bus to go to the airport. I came downstairs about 9:30, and I walked into this huge, massive behemoth, a guy called Yokozuna, standing. He was standing in the foyer. What in the hell are you doing here? He says, man, they've gone without me. I said, what do you mean they've gone without you? What's happened? He said, well, I was sitting on the john in my room, and all of a sudden it all collapsed. Everything collapsed. And there was I lying on the floor, surrounded by all this water and piss and all that kind of stuff. I didn't know what to do. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, they had to come up and rescue me, and they had to pull me up. Can you imagine? This guy was about 400 or 500 pounds, maybe 600 pounds. You know, they lifted him up, and that's why I was late. I said, but you've got to get to Bournemouth. Bournemouth? Where the hell's Bournemouth? We didn't have a clue where Bournemouth was. So I arranged for him to, I got a flight for him to get to Southampton. And then I had the problem of arranging him to get from Southampton to Bournemouth. So I rang up a car company that I knew, and I said, be at the airport such and such a time, and there's a guy there that I'd like you to take to Bournemouth. Yes, sir, no problem, da-da-da. But of course, I didn't tell him who he was, of course, naturally. So the first thing that happened, as he arrived, he went to open the door of the car and he wrenched it, and the handle fell off, you know. He then got into the car. You can imagine it was on the floor, you know. Anyway, eventually they had to bring out another car, kind of a bus really, to put him in, and they got him to Bournemouth. But of course the car hire, they weren't happy. I had to pay for it, you know. But anyway, he got there. That was one of those stories. You don't want to hear any more, do you? No. Any more stories? Got one? Macho Man. Oh yeah, here's a good one. So Macho Man. So we were touring, we did a couple of dates in Israel. And I said to the guys, who wants to go and visit the holy city of Jerusalem? So a few of them said, yeah, we're very interested. So we arranged a bus with a driver and a guide to take us to Jerusalem. And as we're driving along, Macho Man suddenly says to me, he says, hey man, my mother's Jewish. I said, oh really? I said, well that makes you Jewish. He said, what? What do you mean I'm Jewish? I said, if your mother's Jewish, it makes you Jewish. He says, what? I don't believe it. He said, give me the phone. And he gets on the phone to his mom. Hey Ma, they just told me I'm Jewish. And you can imagine the silence at the other end, you know. Anyway, apparently as time went by, he got into the religion and became quite orthodox. So that's about it, really. So thank you for listening to me. I know. Okay. My memoirs will be available very soon. You can buy them at all W.H. Smith shops. So thank you very much.
And Martin, just before you go, we've got a little bit of a surprise video for you that we'd like you to watch. We do indeed.
Hey Martin, it's me, Diana Hart. I'm the very privileged girl who got to be a part of the WWE's SummerSlam 1992 at Wembley Stadium, where I sat in front row and watched my beautiful late husband, Davey Boy Smith, and our British Bulldog, wrestle and defeat my brother Bret the Hitman Hart for the Intercontinental Championship belt. It was one of the greatest recorded matches in history. There were over 80,000 fans cheering, I feel, largely for my husband. And I was there too, and I, honest to God, was torn. that was a legitimate storyline. Wow, it was an event that helped to immortalize Davey. And I know if he was here today, he would tell you he owed you so much thanks, and I do too. And my children, Harry and Georgia. Harry now a wrestling superstar and beloved in England, largely because of his father, who was adored by so many people. And I think so much thanks is owed there to you, because you helped to immortalize him. You did so much for Davey, and he really loved you. He was a big fan of yours, your wife Daphne, your whole family. You know, my father used to say that that match with Davey and Brett was his favorite match. He said he wouldn't change one iota of it. He said it was so fantastic, all of the elements, the crowd, the atmosphere, an outdoor show, no bad weather. It was a flawless night, all coming to this peak with Davey and Brett and Davey winning. Well, Martin, I just want to thank you. I wish Davey were here. You know, oh God, I wish Davey were here. But I wish he were here to tell you all of this himself. But he's not. I believe he's watching over, and I hope that I am saying at least something close to what he would want me to tell you. I'm very proud of you, Martin. You're a fantastic businessman. You're an incredible promoter. You're a really good guy. You're funny. You work hard. You really loved wrestling. And I just owe you so much. So I'm proud of you, and I want to tell you how much you deserve being inducted in the 2018 Wrestling Media Hall of Fame. I hope you have a great night, celebrate with your family and friends, and I hope to see you again one of these days soon.
Applause going for Martin Goldsmith.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Diana. By the way, this outfit is available at all branches of Primark from tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
Primark after this. What an amazing speech, am I right? Amazing. Now, we do have a quick order of business.
Let me take care of this. I'm the wrestler. I'll take care of this. Now, there's a few people out there who are yapping while our inductees are talking. If you don't hush up, I'm going to come out there and dish out some fall-away slaps.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Nobody wants to see the Hendry lock tonight. What he's trying to say is we are filming this for all of our fans, fight fans at home watching, and we do have microphones all around, so if we could limit the chit-chat just a bit out of respect for our inductees while they're speaking, it would be so appreciated. Thank you so much. See how you do it nicely for the people, Joe?
All right, okay, all right.
He gets a little excited. Well, ladies and gentlemen, speaking of getting excited, our next Hall of Fame inductee is an absolute pioneer of wrestling podcast. You know a little bit about podcasts, don't you, Joe?
Absolutely. This wrestler was the very first one to have a successful podcast, and then everybody else just copied him. You know what I mean? Who would do that?
I don't
Who would
know.
do such a thing?
I have
Everyone
no
does
idea.
it. But not only is he an unbelievable podcaster, he's also a phenomenal wrestler. He's made unbelievable contributions to independent wrestling. He's an author, he's a comedian, he's a documentary filmmaker as well.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, our next Hall of Fame inductee.
The fun-loving indie star Colt Cabana has been entertaining fans all over the world as a wrestler for almost 20 years. But it's for his pioneering work in the field of podcasting that we honour Colt today. In 2010, Colt premiered the Art of Wrestling podcast, which has earned a huge following and critical acclaim from the online wrestling community. Featuring candid interviews with many of Cabana's wrestling friends and colleagues, Colt's regular online documentation of life on the road as a pro wrestler sparked the wrestling podcast explosion of the past decade. Today, there is an abundance of online audio and video content produced by Cabana's peers for fans to choose from and enjoy. By sharing his thoughts, his humour and his life through the Art of Wrestling podcast, Colt Cabana sparked an online revolution and changed the way wrestlers communicate with their fans forever. We are delighted to welcome Colt Cabana into the 2018 Wrestling MediaCon Hall of Fame.
Ladies and gentlemen, introducing your next inductor. He is the Vice President of the NWA and Director of 10 Pounds of Gold, David Lagana.
I'm terrible at this, we'll just start there. But the reason I'm better at it is because of Colt Cabana. In 2010, he suggested to me that I do my own podcast. And I was like, what's that? And I really didn't know. And I think what's interesting is he paved the way for a lot of different things in pro wrestling that a lot of the guys, I think, utilize now. Guys sell t-shirts differently now because of his relationship with 1 Hour Tees and Pro Wrestling Tees. And the fact that he's helped change the business in ways like that, I wouldn't have done my podcast. I don't think we would have 10 Pounds of Gold without Colt Cabana because he taught people to bet on themselves. All In this past week was amazing. And, you know, for everybody who was all in then, Cabana was all in 2009, 2010. You know, he didn't do it because it was hip. He did it because he needed to. And for my friend, this is a big honor for him. And to be able to be honored like this, I'm glad I was asked. You know, he's a former NWA World Champion in a period of his life that wasn't honored. And it's been our honor to be able to honor him in that series as we tell his story. So I'm really excited to have him here and induct my friend Colt Cabana into the MediaCon Hall of Fame.
Boom, boom. Colt Cabana. Boom, boom. Colt Cabana. Boom, boom. Colt Cabana. It's Colt Cabana. Straight out of the shop, Mr. Shake and Bake 45. Wrestling cause he feels alive. Great memories and good times. Said no to corporate America. Give it up for your favorite character. Cabana rebel when his head been done. Globetrotter from here to England.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. This Hall of Fame inductee is brought to you by BlueChew.com. Please use the code COLT and get a free sample of Blue Chew. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This is the nicest I've ever dressed up before in my life. And this was 30 pounds from Primark, and I think it was well spent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for Dave Lagana for inducting me into the Hall of Fame this year. It's really appreciated. And like he said, yeah, I was, I don't know, I started the podcast for so many reasons. There's so many different things that I wanted to do, so many reasons why I wanted to do it. One of them was I had a movie called The Wrestling Road Diaries, which championed the world of independent professional wrestling, and I needed a place to, I think it's a great documentary, and I needed a place to plug it, and I knew I couldn't bug every other wrestling journalist to be on their podcast. And I just kind of thought to myself, like, why don't I have my own vehicle where I can start to where I can promote my movie? And also, I fell in love with podcasts in 2009. And I think we all know that sometimes wrestling is really behind the times. And in 2009, the comedy podcast world was just exploding. And I felt that I couldn't wait for I couldn't wait for a wrestler to do what some of the comedians were doing in their own industry, talking to other comedians, talking shop. Because as a fan of comedy, I loved listening to what comedians would talk about each other, and it reminded me about wrestling. And I hear that today with my own podcast, how artists, musicians, poets, chefs, anybody with some kind of creative mind can always relate to my world as a professional wrestler. And one of the other big reasons was I wanted an opportunity for my friends to get their name out there, for people to know their stories. And a lot of that goes back to coming to the UK. The first time I ever came here was thanks to Alex Shane. He brought me over in 2003 for the FWA. And in 2004, I decided to quit my real job, and Alex Shane somehow got me a plane ticket through the Manchester wrestling. There was a store here in Manchester. I don't know if everyone remembered that. It was a superstore. Was that your store? No. Yeah, and so through that, I got the plane ticket, and I came to the UK, and I was able to wrestle. I wrestled like 100 shows in like 90 days, and I saw all these wonderful talent. And the point of all of this is that the independent scene is on such a rise now. We're all kind of very aware, but at that time, some of the Americans were getting some good buzz, at least through Ring of Honor, but the British community of wrestlers were getting absolutely nothing. And I would see guys like Dave Morales and Spud and Rampage Brown and James Mason and Dean Allmark. I mean, these guys were amazing wrestlers, and no one knew anything about them. And to me, as a wrestler, I was like, why doesn't the world know about these guys? And when the opportunity came to start my own podcast, that was, fine, I would get, Jake the Snake Roberts to be on my podcast or someone like that, or Hacksaw Jim Duggan. But the reality is I want people to know about my talented friends, and I want them to know our lives and our struggles. And it was, that's what was so important to me. I always knew that the medium was going to be big. It was going to be important. For some reason, I just knew that was important for people to know the background behind all of the wrestlers and their lives. I said this today in an interview, that when I had a meeting with Vince McMahon, when I was being prepped to go into that meeting with Vince McMahon, which went oh so successful, the people at FCW, Steve Kern and Tom Pritchard, they would say, he likes larger than life characters. That's what Vince McMahon wants, larger than life. And I always said to myself, first I said to myself, I know I'm not larger than life. I'm just a dude from Chicago who happens to love wrestling. And the other thing I always said was, I know who I liked as a fan. And the person that I related the most to was Mick Foley. And it was when Mick Foley was doing those backyard clips and they were playing it on Monday Night Raw. And I was just like, that's what I do. And now that's what he does. That's like, I could be a pro wrestler because he's doing what I do. And that's what I knew that I thought a star in wrestling could be and can be, is that the fans the fans want their own people, right? Not someone that you couldn't see yourself in, but someone that you could see yourself being. And I thought that for myself, and I thought that through the podcast was a way to personalize wrestlers. And I think we've seen that trend now, especially with All In, and we know the Young Bucks' story, and we know Cody's story, and we know Kenny's story. And we root for them, right? We root for them. That's why we buy a ticket to All In. That's why we go to the StarCast. That's why we come to the MediaCon, because we're rooting for these guys. There's such great stories, and that's what wrestling is, and that's what my podcast is. So I have so many thanks to so many people, but the reality is I just thank anyone and everyone who loves the world of professional wrestling. I love all of you. I do. And most specifically, the underground, niche, independent community of professional wrestling. I've always championed it so much. I've thought it's so amazing. I've just done so many weird, and I've been so many weird places, and I've done so many weird shows, and that, for some reason, that includes, doing hundreds of Butlins camps. And to me, that's like, I mean, maybe that's not pro wrestling, but just that's the spirit of professional wrestling that I love, and that I'm so grateful that my podcast and my spirit, I think, has been able to get out there and show the world just how great wrestling is. Not just arena wrestling, but all professional wrestling, any kind, the whole genre. And for that, I thank you so much. This means a lot to me, and I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, your Hall of Famer, Colt Cabana. One of my personal favorites, Colt Cabana. You guys having a good time? Well, I hate to be a downer, but we are up to our final inductee of the night for the Hall of Fame. And Joe, what an inductee we've saved for last.
Well, I'm excited because this individual has promised that if we introduce him in the right way, he's going to give me at least one 5-star rating. Let's make it 5 at some point in my career. Just one.
You worked out that deal, did you?
Just one.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we just heard about podcasts, but where would wrestling be without journalism? When you think of wrestling journalism, you think of this next inductee. He is the godfather of wrestling journalism, Dave Meltzer. Let's have a look at his career.
Dave Meltzer is the founder and editor of the Wrestling Observer, which many regard as the Bible of the inner workings of the industry. Dave's forensically detailed and journalistic approach has put him at the forefront of pro wrestling coverage for more than 30 years, and his status as a knowledgeable historian of the genre is rivaled by few. After its formation in the 1980s, the Wrestling Observer became popular not only with fans but also with many of the biggest names in wrestling. The Observer also popularised the star rating system for grading matches, instituted its own Hall of Fame, and was among the first to fully embrace the digital age through the Wrestling Observer website, which is today regarded as the industry standard for online coverage of pro wrestling and MMA. Such is Dave's influence, he has even had wrestling moves named after him. We are delighted to welcome Dave Meltzer into the 2018 Wrestling MediaCon Hall of Fame.
Dave Meltzer, he's been a commentator, he's been a manager, and he's a journalist in his own right, made a huge contribution to British wrestling. Give it up for Greg Lambert.
Now, I've been privileged enough to work as a journalist, as a writer, for the past 16 years of my professional life, and for pretty much all that time, I've been even more honoured to be able to make a living writing about the art form that I love with every single ounce of my being, and that is professional wrestling. And as a journalist, writing and also reading about professional wrestling is a major part of my life and my research for what I do. And us journalists, we have a lot of admiration for our peers, and that rings true for me. I mean, just to name some names, our Wrestling MediaCon first inductee this evening, and my former boss at Power Slam magazine, Finlay Martin. My current boss and the man who picked up the mantle from Power Slam and is keeping wrestling print journalism alive in Britain, James Dixon. The American journalistic wrestling legend, Mr. Bill Apter. And ever since I started writing in 2002, a major part of that research every week has been subscribing to the Wrestling Observer newsletter. And I'm just one. I mean, in my little humble seaside town in Morecambe, Lancashire, I'm just one of thousands upon thousands of regular avid readers of the Wrestling Observer all over the world. And what really comes across to me as a journalist and as a reader and as a wrestling fan when I read the Wrestling Observer is not only the unbelievable minute detail that this gentleman and his team go into in writing about wrestling, the painstaking research, the hours and hours and hours of research that they must do and that this gentleman himself must do to produce the newsletter, the knowledge of 36 years and more of being a wrestling fan, of covering professional wrestling that goes into it, but the indisputable passion that this man has for wrestling that seeps through every single word. The hours and hours of work, the pages and pages of news, the inside information, the reviews, the reports, it truly is a labor of love for him, which started way back in 1982 when he first started the Wrestling Observer, when he was at college, when he was a wrestling tape trader. And he freely admits that back then, and I know this myself, when you're a journalist, when you're writing about sometimes things that the people that you're writing about don't want you to reveal, but you're doing it because you want to entertain your readers and inform them and educate them and uncover the truth. Sometimes it doesn't make you popular. And this man, I've seen an interview that he's done where he said that a lot of the wrestlers hated him when he first started the Wrestling Observer. But you know what? They all still read it. And they all still read it now in increasing numbers. And the respect for this man has grown and grown throughout his 36 years at the forefront of professional wrestling journalism. If they gave out Pulitzer Prizes for wrestling journalism, this man would truly deserve one. He is the godfather of professional wrestling journalism. And as my peer, as a fan of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, as a subscriber, as a fellow journalist, I tip my computer keyboard, my notepad, and my pen to him. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, welcome our final inductee this evening into the Wrestling MediaCon Hall of Fame, and truly deserved, the one, the only, Dave Meltzer!
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate this. I really appreciate this, you guys. I've been inducted into, I guess, a couple of previous Hall of Fames. And this is just, for whatever reason, I guess maybe because it's in the UK, I've always wanted to come here for wrestling. I came here once for UFC. This feels really different. The last 2 weeks, really, of my life, it has just been something where I never look back, because I'm too busy working. I work really, really hard, and I love doing the Observer. I've been so fortunate to meet so many wonderful people over the last 46 years covering pro wrestling. I started when I was 11 years old in 1971. I did a newsletter and through, when I was in grade school and junior high school, and a little bit in high school. Then I stopped, and then when I was in college, I started up again with the Wrestling Observer. And I never stopped. 36 years, every week. I think Brian Alvarez, who's my partner, said that I have probably written more than any person alive. I don't know if that's true, but it's probably pretty close. But I just want to, say I have been very lucky to have so many wonderful people in my life. I'm going to start with my parents, who they're awesome. They were just awesome parents, the best parents anyone could ever have. We all go through good days and bad days, and I was so happy that a couple of years ago that they got to go to the Luthez George Tragos Hall of Fame when they inducted me there, because my parents, they knew who Luthez was. They were from a very different era, and Luthez was a friend of mine, so that was really special to me in a certain way. But when that night happened, I was really feeling like I was doing that for my parents. I didn't really think about it for myself. And this one, I'm sitting back, and after last week All In, it was kind of an emotional experience for me, because it's like life really changed. Wrestling's really changed. When I started doing this, you know, I mean, wrestling was such a different world. You know, it was a kayfabe world, and what I did, like, you know, he said, is like, people hated me. I was public enemy number 2 in wrestling behind Vern Gagne, maybe then later number 2 behind Vince McMahon. And then I guess in the last couple of years, I didn't really realize it, but there's a new generation. And I mean, you know, we're really lucky. I want to tell you guys, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, we're going to look back. You know how some people will look back at certain eras, like in the 80s, they look at Jim Crockett Promotions, or they'll look at the tag team era, you know, with someone, or whatever it is. You know, the Attitude Era, we all remember how popular pro wrestling was. It was ridiculously popular. So you guys here probably remember because the Wembley show, 1992. It wasn't that big in the United States then, but the Wembley show here was, I mean, how could it be bigger, right? 80,000 people and everything like that. So we're going to look back at this period because of the quality of the wrestling and the quality of the guys in wrestling. It's a completely different type of guy. And I look back, and it was like, when I started, there were things wrong with wrestling, and there were things right with wrestling. I mean, one of the things, if I'm going to say that has changed, and it's not for the better, is the interviews, okay? I mean, if you look back in the 80s and you look at those interviews, man, those guys, Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes and people like that, these guys were, Terry Funk, these guys were masters of the interview craft. And I wish we had guys like that, but we don't. But what we do have now is we have young guys, and not even so young guys, but we have guys who grew up as fans, and they grew up watching Bret Hart wrestling, right? It wasn't so much, you know, nothing against Hulk Hogan, but these guys watched Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, and these guys wanted to be like Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage, and we got a generation of guys that grew up like that, and these guys are just phenomenal wrestlers. I mean, you know, people are going like, oh, you know, you're giving too many 5-star matches this year, and it's like every week I see matches that would have been match of the year 5-10 years ago. The art is elevated, and then I'm watching these guys, you know, Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi and Ishii, Tanahashi, Okada. These guys in the G1 this year, these guys just killed it. I mean, it was like almost like an emotional experience watching the whole thing. So anyway, I got to thank my parents. I got to thank Brian Alvarez, who is not just my podcast partner, but I want to tell you something. I don't really think about it that much, but I'm so lucky that we, you know, through weird circumstances came into each other's lives because, you know, Brian is really one of the best friends I've ever had in my life. If something bad happens, I mean, when my dad got stricken with cancer, I was thinking about this. The first thing I did was call Brian, and it's like, that's when you know who your real best friends are. And I wish he was here. He's got, you know, he's got a young daughter, and this was a pretty long trip and everything like that, but I know that I just want to say, like, Brian, thank you for all the help, that everything you've done for me, and I will always appreciate it for the rest of my life. I do want to mention my son right there because he's a wonderful son, straight A student. He's going to, you know, I mean, I couldn't be blessed, like I said, with better parents, and I couldn't be blessed with better children. You know, Cody and Carly and Marianne helped me so much. They're so, you know, they all have their great qualities and everything like that. And my son's almost like a best friend now, you know. And some of it has to do, he grew up, he was not a wrestling fan. He never watched it. In the last year or two, we've started going to some matches. We kind of bonded around PWG. And by the way, I'll tell you something, man, PWG, that is an awesome night out. I mean, I'll tell you what, you don't have to be a wrestling fan, and he'll tell you this, you don't have to be a wrestling fan. You go to PWG, every time you're gonna have a good time. It's just a really special thing. Again, through this whole thing, we went through some tragic periods with wrestling. We had a lot of wrestlers die young, and that's another thing that the guys of this generation, it's a new generation, man, and it's so heartwarming to me to see that guys are getting to the top through their ability. They're getting through, it's always going to be somewhat of a cosmetic business, but it's less of a cosmetic business and it's more of a performance business than it's ever been. And that's because of you fans. You fans, You changed the business by what you liked, by who you supported. You told the promoters that Daniel Bryan can be a superstar. You know, when they didn't believe it, you have told the whole world that the Young Bucks can be the best tag team in the world, you know, even if they're not in the WWE. You know, the whole business has changed. It's amazing. I'll watch Revolution Pro, and I'll watch like the Okada-Zack Sabre match. You guys remember, some of you guys saw that match. And I'm just watching this, and it was like, you watch the thing and you watch that finish, and it was real, you know? I mean, that finish, it was like, oh my God, that's, you know it, but it's just, it's so different. And then Cody and Nick Aldis had something pretty close to that this last week. I'm gonna tell you, like, I'm really, you know, I don't want to play favorites, and people will accuse me of it, but I'm really proud of those guys, man. Those guys risked their money. Those guys, you know, when those guys set that thing up, and some people here go, oh, you know, that whole bet thing, that was like a work, but that whole bet thing was a work, and it was not. And I was buddies with them, and as soon as Cody tweeted me that thing, and I thought, they better, oh God, if they lose money, I'm gonna feel so guilty, you know? And when they did that, it was still a risk. By the time they put tickets on sale, I had no worries, because I knew those guys were gonna sell so much merchandise at that show that even if they didn't sell out, that they were gonna make a profit. And listen, they sold that place out in 29 minutes, and yeah, and that was a great night. And we've had so many great nights. We had G1 this year. I also want to mention people like from when I first started out that really helped me. Larry Matisic, just a wonderful, knowledgeable guy. A lot of you guys don't know it. He helped run the St. Louis office with Sam Mushnick. And him coming into my life, that was a pivotal thing. Bruiser Brody, some of you guys know Bruiser Brody. It's one of the tragic stories. I tell you what, like, I was sitting there watching All In, and I was just thinking, like, Bruiser Brody was the king of the independents, and he wrestled in Japan and all that, and I was thinking, like, if he were sitting there in that box with me, and I wanted Terry Funk there, and unfortunately Terry's health was not there, but Terry Funk and Bruno Sammartino, I just want to tell you guys, like, this business has incredible real history. I hate it when they fake the history. You guys know that. The real history of this business is so incredible. It's so interesting. And I know, like, Bruno was such an, you know, they wanted to make a motion picture on Bruno Sammartino's life. And he said the only way he would do it is if you tell the real story. And the Hollywood studios, they wanted to fantasize, you know, like all those TV movies that you see, or movies based on real life, you know, they're so Hollywoodized, and the subjects, you know, and you look and you go, like, it didn't really happen like this. And I keep thinking, like, but the real story is so good. Why embellish? Why do you have to embellish when the real life is so great? And, you know, Bruno Sammartino's life was amazing, and it was a heartbreak when Bruno passed away. And I just want to say, like, thanks to Bruno, thanks to Terry Funk, Pat Patterson, who I hung out with today. The first time I ever watched pro wrestling on television, the first time I ever went to a live show, Pat Patterson was in the main event. He was an amazing worker, but his contributions to this business go far beyond being an amazing worker. I mean, you know, as far as he was the brains behind the Royal Rumble, because he grew up or participated in the San Francisco Battle Royals, and he changed that whole thing. He booked WWE during the Hogan era, and later some of the biggest matches of all time were his brainchilds. And a lot of people, you know, the Bret Harts and the Shawn Michaels and people like that Vince McMahon wasn't so sold on at first because of their size. It was like he was pushing them, and, you know, even like Daniel Bryan. I didn't even know this story. You guys know when Daniel Bryan got fired for choking Justin Roberts with his tie. And a lot of people in hindsight think it was just, you know, they told him to lay low for a couple of weeks and we were always gonna bring you back. That is not true. Vince McMahon thought he was done with him. And Pat Patterson, during that period, kept going like, this guy's got talent. I saw him in a match with Batista. He made Batista look really good. And we need to bring him back. And Vince was telling him, no, he's done and all this. And the day that Brian Danielson, was about to agree to terms. The day he was going to sign his contract was the day that Pat Patterson convinced Vince McMahon to bring him back. And that was a great story that the fans made. You know, like, it's funny because like with WWE, and you know, WWE has created, they've done so much for the business. I can't ever take that away. And I don't want anyone to ever like think, you know, WWE's bad. You know, WWE is trying to cater to the most people possible. There's a lot of times I don't agree with what they do, but that's fine. You know, Vince McMahon's been great for professional wrestling. He's changed it. A lot of the changes haven't been for the better, but they have, you know, they were, the end of the territorial system, that was inevitable. Cable TV changed the business. But the thing with all that is that, you know, it's again, you know, as the years go by, people have gotten a lot more open-minded about what kind of talent can be big stars. It used to be larger-than-life stars. Now we got great wrestlers, and we got a great business now. All of you guys who read my stuff over the years, I want to thank you so much. You made my life. You know, I look back, and I usually don't have time to look back, but I looked back this morning, and it was, man, you know, for 46 years. 46 freaking years, guys. And I mean, I work so hard for you guys, and you know, sometimes I get a little bit too, what's the word I'm looking for? A little thin-skinned at times, we all do, and I can't afford to be thin-skinned, but I think that, like, you know, when it comes to like integrity and honesty, you know, those are the things. I mean, I will never lie to you guys. I can't. My dad, man, that guy never told a lie in his life, at least as far as I know, as far as I could tell. And that was my role model. And I was not as good a person as he was, but I strived to be as good a person as he was. And, you know, if you're talking about, and man, I was, you know, not just the wrestlers, but I got to talk about Frank DeFord. When Frank DeFord was my idol as a kid, because I wanted to be a sports writer. I was always going to be a sports writer. It wasn't necessarily professional wrestling. I ended up with professional wrestling, ended up with mixed martial arts, but pro wrestling is where I made my name. And one day, when he was starting a newspaper in the United States called The National. It was going to be the first national sports newspaper, and it only lasted about 16 months. But one day, I'm at my apartment, and I get a phone call, and it's Frank DeFord, and it's like, I knew he was going to start The National. And it's like, the only thing he could be calling me about is a pro wrestling column, because, you know, why would he be calling me? And he did. And it was almost like I had this feeling that, like, I willed my life at that moment. It's like, because that was the impetus that allowed the Observer to really flourish, was those 16 months and the notoriety they got from him. And it was like my idol, the best sports writer in America over the last 50 years. And you know, the stuff he said about me, it really just, you know, that's the greatest thing in the world when you got the best sports writer, you know, maybe who ever lived, but certainly the best sports writer of the last 50 years. And he said that Dave Meltzer is the best reporter in sports journalism. And that quote, he's made it many times until he passed away. And I mean, it's like, no matter what anyone says, you can never take that one away. I mean, that's when your idol says that. And I grew up, and all these guys that, like, I grew up, you know, I didn't idolize wrestlers, but I loved these, like, Terry Funk and Dory Funk and Patterson and you know, Ric Flair, oh my God, Dusty Rhodes. And these guys, I mean, I had my period where I didn't like Dusty too, but at the end, you know, I mean, Dusty Rhodes was such a super charismatic guy. When I went to Florida, you know, I saw when he first turned babyface, and it was electric. He's one of those charismatic guys I've ever seen. Bruno Sammartino is another one. And I got to know all these guys. Some of them as just acquaintances. Some of them as really good friends. Terry Funk taught me so much about this business without telling me anything. He would, you know, keep an open mind. I remember I would watch All Japan Women. I watched it, and it was like they were so far ahead of the time. And I was just like, I'm not going to watch this. This almost intimidated me how good they were. And Terry Funk was, nope, that's your job. You got to be, they're ahead of the curve. You watch these wrestlers who work faster and work harder, and it's like, it's going to be that way. And they're going to tell you that they have no psychology, and the older guys are going to tell you they don't know how to work. But in time, that's going to be what work is. And that's kind of like the philosophy I've had, where in recent years people will go, oh God, they do too much. And I think that too, because I grew up from a different generation, but man, I appreciate it, and they learn. These guys in their 20s, when they get to their 30s, they figure it out. And the psychology of these guys, man, it is the storytelling ability that some of these guys have. It's incredible. How many of you guys watched that Okada Omega match from? Okay, the one in Dominion this year? I've never seen a better wrestling match in my life. I've seen a lot, and I've seen a lot of fantastic matches. It's hard to say one is the best, but I was watching that thing in awe, and I was with all my friends, and we're sitting there watching it, and they're just looking at me when that match is over, and they just said, "That's the best match that we've ever seen, and man, is your next week going to be hell." Because the minute you say that, it's going to be everyone from everywhere, and everyone's entitled to their opinion. And if your opinion's different, God bless you. There's no right or wrong when it comes to opinions. My opinion is my opinion. I'm always going to give it to you. You don't have to agree with my opinion. When it comes to the news, I'm always going to give you the straight news. If it's wrong, I'll tell you it's wrong the next week. I'm not making stuff up or anything like that. And I'm going to do this as long as I can do this, as long as Brian has me before he goes, you're washed up and you're gone, which hopefully isn't going to be for a long, long time. And my enthusiasm is the same as it's always been. And, I want to thank all you guys that are here. I want to thank anyone who's watching on Fight TV, who's a subscriber, or any of the subscribers who will see this, however it shows up. Everything shows up somewhere. Thank you guys for everything. Thank you guys for being, this is a wonderful community. And thank you. We went through so many eras. We went through some bad times. This business, we lost a lot of good people over the years, from drug issues, which was a horrible period. And that's another thing. When I was at All In, we had the older guys and we had the younger guys. And those younger guys, man, they weren't wasted, and they're taking, they used to go to perform in this business, you have to take all those pills. And these younger guys, they're working as hard as anyone, and they're not. They learn from the past, and I hope everybody learns from the past. There were horrible things in this business, and it's a better business now than it's ever been for a lot of the guys. Guys can make great money in WWE, thanks to you guys. Thanks to you guys and understanding what the independent guys do. You guys understand it. You guys know how hard these guys work for you, little by little, fan by fan. Those guys, when they talk to me about it, it's like when they meet you guys at meet and greets, and then the same with me. When I meet you guys with the things like today and things like that, it's like, we appreciate you guys for being the backbone of the niche aspect of wrestling, and the niche aspect of wrestling is a wonderful thing that's going to go on forever. There's always going to be, you guys enable so many of these guys who, under normal circumstances, so many of the top guys, Kevin Owens, Daniel Bryan, these guys, Sami Zayn, what? Yeah. But all of these guys, that we're talking about, without you, they don't make it in pro wrestling. It's you guys who made them stars, and WWE, didn't think they were, but it's like, we'll take them. And because the cream doesn't always, but the cream often rises to the top. And again, And I know you guys appreciate all the Bret Harts and the Shawn Michaels and the Kobashis and Nature Boy and everybody like that who gave us hours and hours and hours of entertainment. And I want to thank everybody in that aspect of the world. And again, man, thank you guys. I love you guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, please keep your applause going for Dave Meltzer. We'd also like to invite all of our inductees on the stage, please, right now. So Manchester, you're about to get one amazing photo opportunity. Presenting once again, Dave Meltzer, Finlay Martin, Colt Cabana, and Martin Goldsmith. Ladies and gentlemen, give a round of applause to your Wrestling MediaCon Hall of Fame class of 2018.
Thank you so much for everyone here in attendance and everyone watching at home on Fight TV. Thank you so much for joining us. What an amazing first day of Wrestling MediaCon. Thank you, SoCal Val, and we shall see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Can I just make a quick announcement? I just sold the trouser for £1 million. So any bid above it, please call me. £1 million, those trousers. 1 million too?
Now we're talking.